Don't you ever talk to her like that again. Ethan's voice cut through the crowded cafe, sharp enough to make everyone freeze. Before we dive into this story, I need to know something. Have you ever stepped in for someone not because you had to, but because it felt right? Drop your answer in the comments. And if you've ever believed that kindness can change a life, hit that subscribe button. Trust me, you'll want to hear how this ends. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. Cleveland, Wednesday morning, 8:12 a.m. Ethan Price balanced a paper bag of muffins, a school backpack, and his car keys as he rushed into Bean Harbor Coffee, a cozy cafe wedged between a laundromat and a bookstore on 5th Street. He was already late. Again. Lila, his 8-year-old daughter, trailed behind, humming softly as she carried her art project, a cardboard model of the solar system that was slowly falling apart. "Daddy, the sun's coming loose." "I know, sweetheart," he said, holding the door open for her. "Let's fix it after breakfast." They joined the short line. Behind the counter, a barista scrolled her phone between orders. The air smelled like espresso and cinnamon rolls. Ethan rubbed his temples. It had been another long night working maintenance at the hospital. Every morning felt like running uphill. Then raised voices near the counter. A man in a suit was berating a woman seated at the corner table. "You think you can just sit there on your laptop and act like you own the place? Move." The woman looked up, startled. She was dressed simply. Jeans, gray sweater, hair pulled into a bun. Calm, polite. "Sir, I was just waiting for my order. There's plenty of room." "I said move," he snapped, slamming his cup on her table. Coffee splashed across her screen. Before she could react, Ethan was there. "Hey," he said sharply. "Back off, man." The cafe went silent. Even the espresso machine hissed to a stop. The man glared. "You don't know who you're talking to." Ethan stepped closer. "And you don't know who you're talking to either." For a second, tension hung thick. Then the man muttered something under his breath and stormed out, slamming the door behind him. Ethan turned to the woman. "You okay?" She blinked, stunned. "I think so. Thank you." "No problem," he said, grabbing napkins and handing them over. "He had no right to talk to you like that." She smiled faintly, still shaken. "You didn't have to step in." "Yeah," Ethan said with a shrug. "Maybe not. But I couldn't just stand there." Lila tugged his sleeve. "Daddy, our muffins?" He smiled down. "Right, muffins." The woman glanced at the little girl and softened. "Your daughter?" "Yep. She keeps me in line." Lila grinned. "That's true." The woman chuckled, and for the first time Ethan noticed how kind her eyes were. Not the polished kind of beauty you see on billboards. Something quieter. "Thank you again," she said. "I mean it." He nodded. "No worries. Some people just forget how to act in public." She hesitated. "Can I buy your coffee? It's the least I can do." He waved it off. "You don't have to." "Please," she insisted. "All right," he said, finally smiling. "Deal." Minutes later, they were sitting at a small table by the window, steam rising from their cups. "So," Ethan said, "what brings you to Bean Harbor?" "Business," she said. "I'm meeting someone later." He nodded. "I come here before dropping Lila off at school. Best coffee in town, at least when they remember my order." She smiled. "You sound like you need a break." He laughed softly. "You have no idea." Lila leaned across the table. "Are you a teacher?" The woman shook her head. "Not quite." "A doctor?" She smiled. "No." "What do you do then?" There was a small pause. "I build things." Ethan tilted his head. "Like an architect?" "Something like that," she said. "Mostly companies." He didn't press. He wasn't the type to dig into other people's lives. But later, when she left, slipping quietly into a black car that looked far too sleek for the neighborhood, he found himself wondering who she really was. That night, after Lila was asleep, Ethan scrolled through the local news while eating leftover pizza. A headline caught his eye. Whitmore Industries CEO Claire Whitmore spotted in Cleveland ahead of expansion project. He froze. The photo, same gray sweater, same bun, same gentle smile. His coffee shop stranger. He leaned back, shaking his head. You've got to be kidding me. He defended a stranger without knowing her name. But soon, that act would change everything he thought he knew about love, pride, and worth. The next morning, Ethan dropped Lila off at school, grabbed a coffee to go, and headed to his second job at Whitmore Industries, the new downtown office that had recently taken over a whole block near Lake Erie. He worked in maintenance, fixing leaky pipes and jammed doors, keeping things running while executives walked past in tailored suits. He didn't mind. Work was work. Still, every time he passed those glass offices, he couldn't help thinking about that woman from Bean Harbor, Claire. He'd Googled her once, told himself it was just curiosity. But the photos didn't match what he'd seen in person. The internet showed a billionaire in designer gowns, not the quiet woman who smiled at his daughter. He shook off the thought and clocked in. Around noon, a call came through his radio. Maintenance needed in conference room B, elevator level 3. Urgent. Ethan grabbed his toolbox and headed up. When he pushed the door open, he froze. There she was, Claire Whitmore, standing at the head of a long table, laptop open, surrounded by people in suits who looked like they hadn't smiled in years. For a second, they just stared at each other. Her expression flickered between surprise and something warmer. Relief, maybe. "Mr. Price?" the office manager said, breaking the silence. "The projector's out. We've got a presentation in 10 minutes. Ethan nodded slowly, forcing himself back to work mode. "I'll fix it right now." He climbed onto the small step stool, fiddled with the cables, and tried not to think about how Claire was standing only a few feet away. Her voice filled the room, steady, confident. "Everyone, please take 5 while we sort this out." When the door closed behind the last executive, Claire spoke softly. "You work here?" "Yeah," he said. "Started 2 months ago. Didn't know it was your company." A small smile tugged at her lips. "And I didn't know you were the man who fixed everything around here." He shrugged, trying to hide the awkwardness. "Guess we're both full of surprises." She laughed quietly. "Guess so." He finished the repairs in silence, though the air between them felt different, charged but uncertain. As he packed up his tools, Claire said, "Thank you again. For the other day, I meant to reach out." "Don't mention it." "No, I will," she said gently but firmly. "Most people don't step in like that." Ethan hesitated. "I just did what anyone should have done." "Not everyone does." There was something about the way she said it, soft, almost sad, that made him look up. For a moment, their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them. Then her assistant walked in, and the moment broke. Later that evening, Ethan found a note slipped under his locker door. "Thank you again. Coffee? CW." He smiled without meaning to. They met the next morning at a quiet cafe near the waterfront. Not the same one as before, but smaller, tucked between a flower shop and a bakery. Claire was already there when he arrived, dressed simply again, hoodie, jeans, no makeup. You'd never guess who she was. "I hope this place is okay," she said. "Less chaos this time." He grinned. "As long as the coffee's strong, I'm good." They sat by the window. Outside, snow was starting to fall in slow, gentle flakes. "So," he said after a moment, "what's it like? Running? All of that?" She tilted her head. "Honestly? Lonely. Everyone either wants something or expects something. No one just talks anymore." He nodded. "Yeah, I get that." "You do." He smiled faintly. "People look at me and see the single dad, the guy who couldn't keep his family together. They don't see the rest." There was a long pause. The sound of the espresso machine filled the space between them. Then Claire said softly, "Maybe we both got used to being underestimated." That line lingered, more truth than either expected to share. As they walked out later, Claire stopped near the door. "Ethan, I'm glad you came." "Me too," he said. She hesitated, then asked, "Do you ever wonder if moments happen for a reason?" He thought about it. "All the time. Usually when I don't understand them." She smiled. Same. Her driver pulled up to the curb. She looked back one last time before getting in. That night, Ethan sat on the couch with Lila, watching an old Pixar movie. She leaned against his arm, half asleep. His phone buzzed. Claire, you ever fix anything that wasn't broken, but just needed a little care? He smiled at the message. Simple words, but they landed deep. Ethan, yeah, happens more than you'd think. He didn't know what to call what was happening. Friendship, maybe, or something quietly growing under the surface. But every time her name lit up his phone, the world felt a little lighter. And somewhere across the city, Claire sat by her window overlooking the lake, scrolling through the text again. For the first time in years, she felt seen for who she really was. Not her last name, not her wealth, just her. Stories like this remind me. Sometimes the people who have the least give the most. If you believe kindness still matters, subscribe. Not for me. For the hope that real hearts still exist in this world. Days turned into a week. Coffee became lunch. Lunch became long talks about dreams they hadn't dared to say out loud before. Ethan told her about Lila's dream of becoming an astronaut. Claire told him about losing her mother before she could see what her daughter built. They found common ground in the quiet spaces between pain and hope. And yet, neither said what they were really feeling. Ethan didn't believe a man like him could fit in her world. Claire feared he'd pull away once he knew everything. Still, every look, every pause, every shared laugh pulled them closer. Then one morning, as Ethan left the cafe, he overheard two executives whispering outside. She's spending a lot of time with that maintenance guy. Yeah, let's see how long that lasts when people start talking. Their laughter stung. He didn't say anything, just walked away, jaw tight, because part of him wondered if they were right. But neither of them knew. This was only the beginning. The world was about to test just how real their connection truly was. It had been 2 weeks since the coffee shop encounter point, 2 weeks of quiet texts and small moments. Lunch breaks that turned into long talks. Time spent with Lila. Claire laughing at her funny stories. Ethan watching them from the corner of his eye. A soft smile on his face. But there was something else too. There were looks that lingered too long. Conversations that brushed against the edges of what neither of them dared say. Ethan tried not to think about it. He had enough on his plate. Bills, Lila's dance recitals, another late-night shift at the hospital. His world had always been about survival, making sure the next day was a little easier than the last. But Claire was different. She made him feel things he didn't want to feel. He sat in his car, staring at the phone in his hand. There was a message from her. Claire, are you free this weekend? I was thinking of taking Lila to the museum. Ethan stared at the text, fingers hovering over the keyboard. It wasn't that he didn't want to see her. He did, but there was a nagging voice in his head, warning him. He tapped out a reply. Ethan, sounds great, but I'm not sure it's a good idea. We're still getting to know each other. There. That was safe. That was practical. He hit send before he could second-guess himself. Claire sat in her apartment, phone in hand, staring at the message. Not sure it's a good idea. She didn't know why it stung so much. For weeks, she'd been trying to figure out what was pulling her toward Ethan. Maybe it was the fact that he was real, no pretenses, no facades. What you saw was what you got. And maybe, just maybe, it was because he made her feel like she mattered beyond her bank balance. But now she felt the distance again. The wall he was building. She set the phone down and rubbed her temples. The next day, the tension between them was palpable. At work, Ethan avoided Claire's gaze. Every time he passed her office, he pretended not to notice when she looked up. It wasn't that he didn't want to talk to her. He did, but there were too many reasons why he shouldn't. He was a maintenance worker. She was a CEO. He was a single dad, struggling to get by. She had everything anyone could want. He didn't belong in her world. He didn't deserve to. That evening, Ethan sat on his couch, scrolling through job listings on his phone. Lila was asleep, and the apartment was quiet. Too quiet. The phone buzzed. It was Claire. Claire, I understand if you need space. Just thought I'd check in. He sighed, staring at the message. He didn't know what to say. "Ethan, I'm not sure what's going on, but I think it's better if we just take a step back." The words felt hollow as he typed them, like he was giving in to something he didn't fully understand. But he had to protect himself. He hit send. The following day, Claire sat in her office, hands folded on her desk, staring at the empty chair across from her. She hadn't heard from Ethan, not since the text. She knew she couldn't push him. He'd made it clear he needed space. But it didn't stop the ache that started in her chest. It was stupid, really. They were just two people who met by chance. She didn't need to overthink this. Still, as she thought about him, the quiet pull in her heart only grew. Ethan kept busy. He worked late at the hospital, made dinner for Lila, and ran errands. But every time he saw a couple laughing or holding hands, his mind wandered back to Claire. He'd told himself to stop thinking about her. But it wasn't that simple. There were moments, quiet, small moments, when he caught himself hoping she was texting him. Maybe he'd misjudged everything. The weekend came and Lila had a dance recital. Ethan stood in the back, waiting for her to finish her performance. The crowd cheered as she spun around, and for a moment, Ethan forgot about everything else, until he saw Claire walk in. She stood at the back of the auditorium, looking out of place. The woman who ran one of the country's largest wellness companies, standing in a crowded school gym with a Starbucks cup in her hand. He wasn't sure what made him walk over to her. Maybe it was the way she stood there, slightly uncomfortable, or the way her eyes met his. She looked relieved to see him. "Hey," he said, scratching the back of his neck. "What are you doing here?" "I was in town for a meeting," she said with a smile. "Thought I'd stop by. Lila's amazing." He chuckled. "She's got moves, that one." They stood in silence, watching Lila take her bow. Claire shifted on her feet, and Ethan felt his pulse pick up. It wasn't supposed to feel like this. "So," Claire said, breaking the silence, "are we going to pretend this isn't a little strange?" He smiled softly. "What do you mean? Us talking like we're two normal people when the whole world thinks I'm... well, me." He looked at her, really looked at her. "You're just Claire, the woman who made sure no one treated me like I was invisible." Her smile softened, her eyes meeting his. "I think I'm starting to believe you." After the recital, they walked outside into the crisp evening air. Lila was bouncing with excitement, chattering about the next recital and her plans to be a ballerina. Ethan smiled, his heart light, but something still gnawed at him. As they said goodbye, Claire touched his arm. "Ethan," she hesitated. "We need to talk." He shook his head, stepping back. "I know, but I'm not sure it's a good idea. We're from two different worlds, Claire, and I'm not sure I can keep up with yours." Her face fell, and she stepped back too, swallowing the hurt. "Maybe you're right," she said quietly. "Maybe you're right." But what neither of them knew, the wall they were building was about to come down, and the truth of their connection was about to shatter everything they thought they understood. Sometimes it's not the love that scares us. It's the fear of being seen. If this story is making you wonder if real connections are worth the risk, don't forget to subscribe. Sometimes we have to take a leap of faith before we can understand where we truly belong. It was a cold, gray Monday when Ethan got the call. "Ethan, we need you up at the Whitmore building, ASAP. Something's gone wrong with the plumbing on the executive floor. It's urgent." His stomach twisted. The Whitmore building. Claire's world. The last place he wanted to be. But here he was. He grabbed his toolbox, threw on his jacket, and headed out. The building loomed ahead, a steel and glass giant reflecting the winter sky. Felt like walking into a different life. When Ethan arrived, the building was buzzing with energy. People in suits rushed by, oblivious to the world beneath their polished shoes. He nodded at the receptionist, who gave him a distracted smile, and made his way to the elevators. The ride-up was silent. The walls of the elevator felt too close, too oppressive. Ethan kept his eyes fixed on the floor numbers, trying not to think about Claire. But as the doors opened on the top floor, he was hit with a wave of cold air. The executive floor was quiet now, the halls empty except for a few cleaning staff. He walked toward the source of the problem, a small utility closet at the end of the hallway. As he turned the corner, he froze. There, standing with her back to him, was Claire. Her hair was a little messy, her sleeves rolled up, her face flushed from the cold. She was on the phone, her voice sharp but calm, the way she spoke when things weren't going right. Ethan cleared his throat, unsure of what to do. Claire turned, immediately catching sight of him. Her eyes softened, but she didn't smile. "Ethan, didn't expect to see you up here. I got the call. Something about a leak." He gestured toward the utility closet. "Yeah, one of the pipes burst," she said. "It's a mess in there. The whole floor's without heat. They're all freaking out in their offices." Ethan nodded, trying to ignore the tightness in his chest. "Well, I'll get it sorted. No big deal." Claire paused, as if weighing something. "Actually, would you mind if I stuck around and helped? I mean, I know it's your job, but I think we could use the extra hands." Ethan looked at her, surprised. "You want to help with the plumbing?" She shrugged, a wry smile tugging at her lips. "Why not? I've managed billion-dollar projects, but I've never fixed a leak." He laughed, despite himself. "All right, I guess if you really want to, you can hold the flashlight." She stepped closer, dropping the phone in her purse. "Deal." It was strange working side by side with her. They weren't talking about business or wealth or power, just fixing a pipe in an office building, getting their hands dirty like everyone else. She wasn't a CEO up here with him. She was just Claire, trying to stop water from flooding the floor. And in that small, quiet space between them, Ethan realized something. He didn't feel like he was beneath her anymore. Claire was no longer the untouchable CEO. She was a person, a woman who wanted to help, who laughed at her own mistakes, who didn't mind getting dirty when things went wrong. She was real. As they worked, the conversation flowed naturally. "So," Ethan said, adjusting the wrench, "what made you start all this?" She shrugged. "I guess I never really thought about it. I just wanted to help people. My mom was always sick when I was younger. I couldn't do anything about it, but I figured maybe I could make sure other people had better access to care." "That's actually a pretty cool reason," Ethan said, smiling. Claire looked up, meeting his gaze. "I didn't do it for the money or the fame, but it's hard to explain that to anyone. They see the business, the profits, the power. They don't see why I do it." Ethan nodded. "I get that. People judge you for what they see on the outside." She paused, her expression shifting. "You ever feel like people don't really know who you are? That they only see the label they've put on you?" The question hit home harder than he expected. Every day, they worked in silence for a moment, the sound of the wrench turning against the pipe echoing in the quiet room. When they finally fixed the leak, Claire wiped her hands on her jeans and sighed. "I'm not going to lie, I think we made a pretty good team. Not bad for a CEO and a maintenance guy," Ethan said with a grin. She laughed, and it was the first time in days that he saw the tension leave her shoulders. For a moment, they just stood there, breathing in the shared accomplishment. As Ethan gathered his tools, Claire followed him to the door. "I should get back to the office," she said, eyes flicking to the floor. "But, hey, if you're free later, maybe we could grab a drink? I think we could both use one." Ethan hesitated. He'd tried to keep distance. He'd tried to be practical. But every time they were together, it felt like it was impossible to fight the pull. "I don't know if that's a good idea," he said quietly. Her eyes searched his face, her expression unreadable. "Why? Because I'm a billionaire? Or because we're from different worlds?" Ethan looked at her, torn. "Both." Claire didn't look angry. She didn't even seem upset. But there was something in her gaze that made his chest tighten. "You know, I don't need your approval, Ethan. I don't need your judgment. I'm just asking if you'd like to spend time with me, as who I am, not as the CEO, not as the rich girl. Just Claire." He swallowed, the words stuck in his throat. There was something in her voice, vulnerability maybe, something he hadn't heard before. "Okay," he said quietly. "One drink." She smiled softly, and the air between them shifted. As Ethan walked back to the elevator, his mind raced. What was he doing? Why was he even considering this? Claire Whitmore was everything he had avoided for years. Out of his league, out of his reach. He didn't belong in her world. But maybe, just maybe, it wasn't about belonging. Maybe it was about choosing each other, regardless of where they came from. But that choice, the one he was avoiding, was about to change everything. And when the truth of who they were finally surfaced, neither of them would be ready for what happened next. Have you ever found yourself holding back because of what others might think? If you've ever felt like you didn't belong, but took the leap anyway, hit subscribe. Love isn't about fitting in. It's about showing up. Friday night came faster than Ethan expected. He stood outside Lakeside Tavern, a small neighborhood bar off Euclid Avenue. The kind of place where the walls smelled like fried food and the jukebox still played old country songs. He wasn't sure if he belonged here tonight. Claire had texted him that afternoon. Claire, 7 p.m. tonight? Just us. He'd stared at it for a long time before replying with a simple, okay. Now, standing by the door, he exhaled and stepped inside. The place was dim, warm, familiar. He spotted Claire at a booth in the corner. No bodyguards, no designer dress, just jeans, a dark green sweater, and her hair down. When she saw him, she smiled, not the practiced, camera-ready smile he'd seen in photos. This one was real. You made it, she said as he sat down. Would have been hard to say no, he said quietly. The waitress brought 2 beers and a plate of fries. So, Claire said, leaning forward. You look nervous. Ethan chuckled. I'm not used to this. Fancy people don't usually hang out here. I'm not fancy tonight, she said. Just me. He nodded, watching her carefully. You're always just you, huh? She hesitated. I try to be, but it's hard when everyone expects something different. You know what that's like? Ethan looked down at his hands. Yeah, I do. For a while they just talked about music, childhood, little things. Claire told him she used to spend summers in small Ohio towns with her mom before life got busy. Ethan told her how Lila loved stargazing, how he worked double shifts to save for her future. Their words started to soften. The walls between them cracked open. Then Claire looked at him and said, You know, when you stepped in for me at that coffee shop, it reminded me of my dad. Ethan tilted his head. Your dad? Yeah, she said, eyes distant. He used to do that. Defend people. He didn't care who they were, rich, poor, didn't matter. He said kindness didn't cost anything, but it could save everything. Ethan smiled. Sounds like a good man. He was, she whispered. But I lost him when I was 16. There was a pause, soft, respectful. I'm sorry, Ethan said. Thanks, she murmured. I think I buried myself in work after that. Building something felt like the only way to not fall apart. He nodded slowly. Guess we both built walls in different ways. She looked at him then, really looked. What about you? You never talk about her. Lila's mom. The air between them grew heavy. Ethan leaned back, running a hand over his jaw. She left. Said she couldn't do it anymore. Being a mom, being tied down, whatever. One morning she just packed up and went. Claire's eyes softened. You raised Lila alone? He nodded. Yeah, it's been hard, but she's my reason. My whole world. For a long moment, Claire didn't say anything. Then she reached across the table, resting her hand over his. You did good, Ethan. You did really good. He stared at her hand, then up at her face. You make it sound easy. It's not, she said softly. But you make it look that way. They sat there, neither speaking, as the jukebox hummed a slow tune. For the first time, Ethan didn't see Claire as a billionaire. He saw her as someone just trying to find peace, the same way he was. And maybe, for the first time in a long time, he wasn't so sure he wanted to keep his walls up. When they left the bar, it was snowing lightly. The streets glowed under the yellow light of old lampposts. Claire shivered and tucked her hands into her coat pockets. Ethan offered his jacket. Here, take it. She smiled. You'll freeze. I've been through worse, he said, draping it over her shoulders anyway. They walked side by side down the quiet street, their footsteps crunching against the snow. At her car, Claire turned to him. "Ethan," she said softly, "I don't know where this is going, but I don't want to pretend anymore." He looked at her, uncertain. "Pretend about what?" "That I don't care. That this doesn't mean something." He swallowed hard. "Claire." "I know," she said quickly, sensing his hesitation. "You think it's complicated. You think we're from different worlds. But I don't care about that. Care about you. About Lila. About the way you make things feel real." Ethan's throat tightened. "Claire, I don't want to mess up your life. You have a company to run. People looking at you all the time. Then let them look," she said, her voice trembling. "Because for once, I want to be seen for the right reasons." He didn't answer. He wanted to, but every part of him screamed to be careful. Finally, he said quietly, "I'm scared. Not of you. Just of what happens if this doesn't work." Her expression softened. "Maybe that's how you know it's real." They stood there in the cold, silence wrapping around them. Then Claire smiled sadly and whispered, "Good night, Ethan." "Good night, Claire." She turned, stepping into her car. As she drove away, Ethan stood there, breath visible in the cold air, heart full of something he didn't have words for. You ever notice how the real moments, the honest ones, never ask for attention? They just happen. If you've ever felt something real but didn't know what to do with it, subscribe. Because maybe stories like this remind us we're not alone. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Claire's face. The way she looked at him when she said she didn't want to pretend anymore. He turned on the small lamp by his bed and stared at the ceiling. Maybe it was time to stop running from what was already happening. Maybe some things weren't meant to be controlled. But just as he started to let that thought sink in, his phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "Ethan Price, this is the Cleveland Gazette. We'd like to comment on your recent connection to Claire Whitmore. Care to share your side before we publish?" He froze. The walls he'd spent years building started to crumble. The truth had a way of finding light, even when you tried to keep it hidden. And what came next would test everything they'd built, and everything they were afraid to lose. The next morning, Ethan woke up to his phone buzzing nonstop. Missed calls. Dozens of notifications. Messages from people he hadn't heard from in years. When he finally opened one, his heart sank. Headline: Unknown mechanic seen with billionaire Claire Whitmore. Who is he? There were photos, one of them walking out of the coffee shop weeks ago, another of him handing her his jacket in the snow, and a final one that hurt the most. Claire smiling at him like no one else existed. Ethan sat on the edge of his bed, head in his hands. Lila's little voice came from the hallway. "Dad? Are you okay?" He looked up quickly and forced a smile. "Yeah, sweetheart. Go get ready for school. Okay?" But inside his chest felt tight. By the time he got to the shop, everyone had seen it. "Yo, Price," one of the guys called out. "Didn't know you were dating a billionaire." Ethan ignored the laughter, heading straight for the office. His boss, Rick, was waiting. "Man, you couldn't have told me this before the tabloids did?" Rick said, half joking, half serious. Ethan sighed. "There's nothing to tell. It's not like that." Rick leaned back. "Doesn't matter what it's like. You know how people talk. Some folks already think you're gonna leave us behind now that you're hanging out with money." Ethan shook his head. "That's not who I am." "Then you better make that clear fast," Rick said. "Because once your name's in the news, people don't see the real story. They just see headlines." Ethan nodded, but the words hit deep. Later that day, he met Claire at her office. The atmosphere was tense. She looked pale, tired, like she hadn't slept. "I tried to stop the story," she said softly, "but someone leaked it before my PR team could respond." "Who?" he asked. She shook her head. "I don't know, but it's spreading fast. Investors are calling, the board's asking questions. They think you're some scandal." Ethan's jaw tightened. "I didn't ask for this." "I know," she said. I didn't mean for you or Lila to get dragged into it." He looked away, anger and hurt mixing in his chest. "You said you didn't care what people thought." I don't. Yes, you do. He cut in, voice sharp but low. You care about your image, your company. And I get it, Claire, I really do. But I can't live in a world that turns everything real into something for headlines. She stepped closer. Ethan, please don't do this. I just need a little time to fix it. He shook his head. Time doesn't fix everything. Sometimes it just shows you what people really mean. She flinched like he'd struck her. Ethan, her voice cracked. You think I don't care about you? About Lila? He swallowed hard. I think you're used to control. And this, whatever this is, doesn't fit in that world. Her eyes glistened. I was trying to protect you. Then maybe I didn't need protecting, he said quietly. Maybe I just needed you to stay. Silence. Outside the window, the Cleveland skyline glowed under gray clouds. Cars passed, horns blared. Life went on while they stood frozen. Finally, Claire whispered, If I step back for a while, will that help? He looked at her like she was fading in front of him. If you step back, you're just proving everyone right. She blinked away tears. Then what do you want me to do? Ethan hesitated, every part of him screaming two different truths. Finally, he said softly, I want to believe you. That night, they didn't speak again. Claire stayed in her penthouse, staring out at the city lights, her phone quiet in her hand. Every time she thought of calling him, fear stopped her. Ethan sat on the couch with Lila asleep on his shoulder. The TV was on, but he wasn't watching. He felt like everything was slipping, not because of what they'd done, but because of what people believed. He wanted to fight for her, but something inside him said maybe she didn't want to be fought for. A few days later, the story escalated. Online forums twisted every detail. Some accused him of using her for money. Others called her reckless. Claire's company issued a formal statement. Ms. Whitmore's personal life is private. The company remains focused on its upcoming expansion. Ethan read it twice. His stomach sank. No mention of him. No truth. Just business as usual. He turned off his phone, exhaling shakily. Guess that's my answer. The next morning, Claire showed up at his shop. No makeup, no entourage, just Claire. Ethan, she said, voice trembling. You saw the statement. I did. It wasn't what I wanted. Didn't look like anyone forced you, he said quietly. Please don't do that, she said, stepping closer. I'm trying to hold things together. If I lose this company, he interrupted, then you lose something you can rebuild. I'm not sure I can rebuild this. Her lip quivered. You don't mean that. He met her eyes, pained but calm. I wish I didn't. She stood there for a long time, tears threatening but refusing to fall. Then she whispered, I'll go. He didn't stop her. When she left, it felt like winter had stepped inside. Have you ever lost someone not because you stopped caring, but because fear got in the way? Tell me what you'd have done differently. That night, Ethan took Lila to the park near Lake Erie. The air was cold, but the lake was still. Lila threw pebbles into the water. Daddy? She asked. Are you sad? He looked at her small face and forced a smile. A little, but it's okay. She tilted her head. Did Miss Claire make you sad? Ethan's chest tightened. No, sweetheart. She just needed time. Lila nodded slowly, then said something so simple it hurt. Maybe she'll come back when she's ready to be happy again. Ethan looked at the rippling water and whispered, Maybe she will. Sometimes love isn't enough. Sometimes it's just the beginning of goodbye. But what if goodbye wasn't the end? Just the pause before courage finds its way back? A week passed. Cleveland felt colder, heavier. Ethan kept his head down at work, fixing engines, answering customers with half a smile. At night, he'd sit at the kitchen table after putting Lila to bed, staring at his phone. Her name was still there in his messages, Claire Whitmore, but there hadn't been a single new text. He told himself it was for the best, that maybe she needed her world, and he needed his. But when the house got quiet, he realized how much space she'd filled without even trying. Across the city, Claire was unraveling. Her office looked spotless, but she couldn't focus. Every meeting sounded hollow. Every polished word she said felt like someone else's voice. She looked out her window at the snow-covered streets below and whispered to herself, "What am I doing?" Her assistant, Julia, stepped in quietly. "You've got 5 minutes before the investor call." Claire nodded without turning around. "Julia, how do you know when something's worth losing everything for?" Julia hesitated. "When it hurts more to stay silent than it does to speak." The answer hung in the air like a truth Claire had been avoiding. That evening, she drove out of the city, no driver, no plan. Just her, the road, and the winter wind pressing against the glass. After an hour, she ended up in Lakewood, near the park where Ethan often took Lila. She parked and sat there, heart pounding. Through the windshield, she saw the lake, frozen over, gray and still. It looked exactly like she felt inside. She took a deep breath and whispered, "It's time." Ethan was still at the shop, cleaning up, when he heard the bell over the door. He turned and froze. Claire stood there, snow melting on her coat, eyes red from the cold. For a moment, neither spoke. Then she said quietly, "Hi." He swallowed hard. "You shouldn't be here." "I know," she said, voice trembling. "But I had to be." Ethan looked around. "You're making things worse for yourself." "Maybe," she said, "but I can't keep pretending I didn't mean every word I said to you." He looked at her, tired, conflicted. "Claire, your world and mine don't fit." She stepped closer. "Then maybe we stop trying to fit them. Maybe we just start where we are." He turned away, hands tightening around a rag. "You don't understand. The whole city's talking. Lila's school even called, asking if it's true. I don't want that for her." Claire's voice softened. "And I don't want this silence for us." He didn't answer. The hum of a nearby heater filled the room. She continued, her voice breaking slightly. "I spent years building a life that looks perfect, but it's empty without something real in it. Without you." Ethan closed his eyes. For the first time, he saw not a billionaire, but a woman standing in front of him, choosing something fragile over everything safe. He turned to face her. "What if I can't give you the life you're used to?" She shook her head. "I'm not asking for that. I just want the life that feels true." For a long moment, they said nothing. The air was thick with everything unspoken. Ethan walked past her toward the door, opened it, and looked out at the dark street. "You really think this can work?" he asked quietly. "I don't know," she said, "but I'd rather fail trying than live wondering what could have been." He stared at her, tired eyes, raw heart, and for the first time in weeks, something inside him shifted. He didn't take her hand. He didn't make a promise. He just said softly, "Then prove it." Claire nodded once, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I will." She turned and left, stepping into the falling snow. Ethan stood there, the door still open, cold air filling the shop. He didn't chase her, not yet, but for the first time he wanted to. The world outside felt frozen, but something inside both of them was beginning to thaw. Claire drove without music, her hands trembling on the wheel. She replayed his words over and over, "Then prove it." Every mile felt like a question. How do you prove love in a world that doesn't believe in it anymore? Ethan locked up the shop, turned off the lights, and stepped into the quiet night. The streets shimmered with snow, his breath rising in the air. He didn't know what came next, but he knew one thing. He wasn't angry anymore, he was afraid. And maybe that meant he still cared. That night, Claire made a decision. She sent an email to her board, scheduling an emergency meeting for Monday morning. No excuses, no spin, just truth. And for the first time, she felt peace. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's choosing love anyway. And on Monday, Claire Whitmore was about to choose, no matter what it cost. Monday morning arrived gray and quiet. Claire stood at the glass wall of the Whitmore Tower conference room, watching snow fall over downtown Cleveland. Her reflection stared back at her, steady this time, not scared. The board members began to file in, murmuring greetings and flipping through notes. Claire didn't bother with her usual introduction. "Before we start," she said, voice firm, "I need to tell you something. The room went still. I've made mistakes. I let fear make my choices. And I've forgotten that this company was built on honesty, not hiding. She paused, her gaze steady. So, if the press wants to know if I care about Ethan Price, the answer is yes. He's good. He's real. And I'm not ashamed of that. You could have heard a pin drop. One of the older board members cleared his throat. Ms. Whitmore, are you sure this is wise? Claire smiled faintly. No, but it's right. News traveled fast at BY noon. Her statement hit every outlet. Whitmore CEO opens up. I'm not ashamed of love. Ethan saw it on the shop TV while waiting for a customer's payment to process. At first, he thought he misheard it. But then he saw her face. Calm, certain, unguarded. Rick slapped his shoulder. Man, she just blew up the internet. Ethan didn't respond. He just grabbed his jacket and walked out. He drove straight to the Whitmore building. The streets were slick, the city shining with winter light. When he reached the lobby, security recognized him immediately. Mr. Price? The guard asked. Ethan nodded. She expecting me? The guard smiled. You better get up there. She just cleared her schedule. When the elevator doors opened on the top floor, Claire was standing there waiting. For a moment, they just stared. Two people who'd been through every shade of fear and were finally done running from it. Ethan took a step forward. You didn't have to do that. I know, she said softly. But I wanted to. I'm tired of pretending that what matters has to be hidden. He looked at her, really looked. You realize this means every camera in this city's gonna chase you? She smiled. Then let them. Because I want the world to see what I see. They stood there in the quiet, the skyline stretching behind them. Ethan reached out, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. You're something else, you know that? Claire laughed through tears. So are you. And for the first time, there was no hesitation. He kissed her soft, sure, real. Not the kind of love that asked for attention, but the kind that survived it. A few weeks later, things began to settle. Lila's school stopped calling. Customers stopped teasing. And Claire, for the first time, found herself at Ethan's small apartment on a Friday night, sitting cross-legged on the couch, eating pizza with Lila and laughing at old Disney movies. This is nice, Claire said quietly as Lila ran off to get more popcorn. Ethan smiled. Told you, you don't need fancy to feel right. She leaned her head on his shoulder. No, she whispered. I just needed home. You ever notice how the right people don't fix your world? They remind you what home feels like. If stories like this remind you of that kind of love, hit subscribe, because some stories deserve to stay. Months later, Claire's company hosted a small charity event on the edge of Lake Erie. Families, local workers, even the shop crew came out. Ethan stood beside her as she spoke on stage about second chances, how kindness can rewrite lives. When she looked out at the crowd, her eyes found his. He gave a small nod. In that moment, she knew. All the noise, the chaos, the risk. It had been worth it. After the speeches, Ethan and Claire walked down to the water. The lake shimmered under the late spring sun. Lila ran ahead, laughing, chasing gulls. Claire slipped her hand into his. Think she's happy? Ethan smiled. Yeah, I think we all are. They watched as Lila drew a heart in the sand, her laughter echoing in the breeze. Claire whispered, You know, if someone told me last year this is where I'd end up, I'd have laughed. Ethan grinned. Guess life's got a funny way of proving us wrong. She leaned against him, quiet for a long moment. Then she said, Thank you for defending me that day. You changed everything. He looked at her, eyes soft. Nah, you just made me believe it mattered. As the sun dipped low, Claire bent down and helped Lila carve the words love at last inside the heart she'd drawn. Ethan watched, smiling. For the first time in years, the world felt simple again. Not perfect, just right. Do you believe some people are worth the wait? If this story hit you, drop a heart in the comments, because love found at last is still the best kind. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.